Before you call him a liar, ask yourself one question: why would a hungry man give away the only food he had? Claire Whitmore's voice cut through the marble lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel and stopped every camera from clicking. Mason Reed stood beside a long conference table in his faded work jacket, one hand resting near a crumpled brown paper bag. Melted snow darkened his shoulders. Grease remained beneath his fingernails. Across from him, executives in tailored suits watched as though poverty itself had interrupted their meeting. Brent Calloway pointed toward Mason. You recognized her. You followed her. You staged the meal. The accusations came quickly, each one sharpened for the reporters gathered near the elevators. Mason said nothing. Near the revolving doors, his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, held her backpack against her chest. Her blue coat was missing a button. In her other hand was the lunch bag that had once held one turkey sandwich, one bruised apple, and one small carton of milk. It had been all they could afford that night. Now it sat beneath a crystal chandelier while strangers debated the price of Mason's dignity. Claire stood at the center of the room. There was no thrift store coat around her shoulders now. No wet hair clung to her face. She wore a charcoal suit and the quiet authority of a woman whose name appeared above the hotel entrance in gold letters. 2 days earlier, Mason had believed she had nowhere to sleep. Now everyone knew she controlled the company that owned the building. Brent tapped the paper bag with one finger. This was your prop, wasn't it? Sophie stepped forward. Don't touch it. The room shifted. Mason turned toward her. Sophie, stay by the door. That was our dinner. Her voice trembled, but it carried. Brent gave a thin smile. And your father expects us to believe he gave it away without knowing who Ms. Whitmore was. Mason finally looked at him. She was cold. That isn't an answer. She was hungry. And you wanted something in return. Mason glanced at Sophie, then at the bag. No, he said quietly. I wanted her to stop feeling invisible. The heating vents hummed overhead. Snow brushed the tall windows. Somewhere behind the front desk, an elevator bell chimed, but no one moved. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and second chances, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Mason Reed. Claire looked toward Natalie Brooks, who stood beside a laptop connected to the conference screen. Brent straightened. The security footage proves Mr. Reed knew exactly who you were. Claire's expression did not change. Then show them your version first. The lights dimmed. A screen descended behind her. Brent's edited video appeared. The black SUV, Claire near the hotel entrance, Mason approaching her beneath the diner awning. A murmur moved through the lobby. But no one in that room knew the original footage had already been authenticated by an independent investigator. No one knew the missing hours contained the truth. And before the morning ended, one complete recording would leave the entire room silent. 2 days earlier, Claire Whitmore had stood in front of a mirror and asked herself a question no one in her boardroom had dared to ask. What does this company look like to someone nobody respects? At 7 that morning, she removed every symbol people recognized before they recognized her. The pearl earrings disappeared into a drawer. The gold watch followed. Then the tailored navy coat her employees knew from magazine covers and corporate events. Natalie Brooks, her executive assistant, stood near the window with her arms crossed. You could send outside auditors. They know how to behave around auditors. You could conduct anonymous interviews. They're already afraid to speak. And you think dressing like someone without money will show you the truth? Claire pulled on a faded thrift store coat with frayed cuffs and one mismatched button. I think being treated like someone without power might. 3 weeks earlier, an unsigned envelope had arrived at Whitmore Hospitality Group headquarters. Inside were copies of employee complaints from several properties. Unpaid overtime, withheld tips, broken equipment, retaliation disguised as performance reviews. The official reports showed none of it. Employee satisfaction remained above 97%. Safety compliance was listed as perfect. Every complaint had been marked resolved. The numbers were too clean. Claire had built her career on data. Now the data felt like a lie wearing a pressed suit. A small camera had been sewn into the upper button of her coat. It would record locally onto an encrypted memory card. Nothing would stream live. An independent investigator would review the files after the experiment ended. Claire carried $20, a prepaid phone, and identification under the name Catherine Moore. Nothing connected her to wealth. Nothing connected her to power. Natalie handed her the phone. The emergency phrase is Blue Lantern. I remember. You say it once, and I send security. Claire placed the phone in her coat pocket. And if I don't call? Natalie looked at the worn jacket and scuffed boots. Then I wait until the final check-in tonight. By 9:15, Claire understood what powerlessness looked like. At the Whitmore Grand, a front desk manager refused to let her use the restroom. Guests only. I'm here about a housekeeping job. Applications are online. My phone isn't working. That isn't our responsibility. He never met her eyes. His gaze stopped at her coat, her shoes, and the cheap canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. Then he called security. Outside, freezing rain struck the sidewalk. Through the revolving doors, Claire watched the same manager greet a wealthy couple with a smile polished by years of practice. At noon, a coffee shop cashier served 3 people who arrived after her. At 2, a department store employee followed her between aisles. At 4, Claire asked a restaurant hostess whether untouched bread from an abandoned table would be thrown away. The woman dropped it into the trash. We don't hand out leftovers. I wasn't asking for charity. That's what people always say. By nightfall, Claire's feet were blistered. Her money was gone, spent on bus fare, water, and a cheap umbrella that broke in the wind. She sat beneath the cracked awning of a diner owned by a Whitmore subsidiary. Her prepaid phone had died an hour earlier. One call could have ended the experiment. Now she had no call left to make. Then a little girl's voice rose through the rain. Daddy, I think she's hungry. Claire looked up. A tired man in a faded work jacket stood beneath the streetlight, holding his daughter's hand in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. He looked at Claire's face, not her clothes. Then Mason Reed walked toward her. Daddy, I'm not really hungry. Mason Reed knew the lie before Sophie finished saying it. She sat on an overturned supply crate in the basement of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, her math worksheet balanced across her knees. The boiler groaned behind them like an old animal struggling to breathe. Pipes clicked overhead. The air smelled of rust, dust, and hot metal. Mason tightened a wrench around a corroded valve. You skipped lunch. I had crackers. 2 crackers. They were big crackers. He glanced over his shoulder. Sophie gave him the smile children use when they are trying to protect their parents. It was the same smile she had learned after her mother died. For years had passed since Rebecca Reed's hospital room went quiet, but grief still lived in small places. In the empty side of Mason's bed, in the yellow mug no one used, in the way Sophie lowered her voice whenever money came up, as though bills could hear her. Mason turned back to the boiler. Finish number 6, he said gently. I'll check it in a minute. His hands moved with the steady precision of a man who understood broken things. He had worked construction, auto repair, electrical maintenance, and every overnight shift that paid enough to keep the lights on. What he could not do was make one paycheck stretch forever. At 6 o'clock, Brent Calloway entered the basement wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than Mason's truck. You done yet? Almost. You said that 20 minutes ago. The pressure regulator is failing. Brent sighed. Then make it stop failing. It needs to be replaced. Not tonight. If it ruptures, the east wing loses heat. Brent stepped closer. You're a subcontractor, Reed. Your job is to fix problems, not create expenses. The expense already exists. For a moment, only the boiler spoke. Then Brent picked up Mason's subcontractor timesheet from the bench. You logged 5 hours. My hotel only pays your agency for 4. But I've been here for 5, Mason said. Brent crossed out the number, wrote 4, and signed his approval. Take it up with your boss. I only approve what I want to pay. Mason stared at the page. We agreed on $200. You'll be paid for the hours I approve. The damage was worse than your report said. Then work faster next time. Sophie looked up from her worksheet. Mason saw the question in her eyes, but he did not argue. Not there. Not with rent due in 3 days and her inhaler nearly empty. Brent signed the altered ticket and walked away. That was the quiet cruelty of being poor. People believed every need was permission to take something from you. An hour later, Mason and Sophie stood beneath the fluorescent lights of a neighborhood pharmacy. He paid for the inhaler, counted what remained, then checked the bus schedule beside the door. After fare, he had $6.83. At the diner next door, he bought 1 discounted turkey sandwich, a bruised apple, and a small carton of milk. Sophie looked into the bag. You can have the sandwich, Dad. We're sharing. I told you, I'm not hungry. Mason crouched and zipped her coat to the chin. You don't have to take care of me. She looked down. Somebody should. The words struck deeper than she knew. Outside, sleet moved sideways beneath the streetlights. They had walked half a block when Sophie suddenly stopped. Under a cracked awning, a woman sat alone in a worn brown coat, rubbing her hands against the cold. Sophie tugged Mason's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "I think she needs our dinner more than we do." Mason looked at the paper bag, then at his daughter, and without saying a word, he turned toward the stranger. "Ma'am, are you waiting for someone?" Claire looked up at Mason Reed as sleet hissed against the sidewalk. "No. Do you have somewhere warm to go?" She hesitated. "Not tonight." Sophie stood beside him, both hands wrapped around the straps of her backpack. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes stayed fixed on Claire with the solemn concern children carry before the world teaches them to look away. Mason glanced toward the diner entrance. Through the fogged glass, customers sat beneath amber lights, lifting coffee cups and laughing over plates of food. A waitress noticed Claire beneath the awning, frowned, and pulled the blinds halfway closed. Mason saw it. Claire saw him see it. He sat beside her on the cold concrete ledge. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Do what? Sit here." "Neither do you." He placed the brown paper bag between them. Claire recognized hunger. She had studied it in reports, discussed it at charity dinners, and approved donations large enough to earn applause. But this was different. Hunger here had a sound, the crinkle of thin paper, the quiet breath of a child pretending not to stare at food. Mason opened the bag. One turkey sandwich, one bruised apple, one carton of milk. Claire looked at Sophie. "That's your dinner." Sophie shrugged. "It's our dinner." Mason tore the sandwich into 3 pieces. He gave Claire the largest, Sophie the next, and kept the smallest for himself. Claire noticed. "You should take more." "I'm fine. You barely have any." "I ate earlier." Sophie looked down at her shoes. The lie passed between them without anger. It was gentle, practiced, and painfully familiar. Claire held the sandwich, but did not bite. "I can't take this." Mason's voice remained quiet. "You can. What will you eat?" "We'll manage." "That isn't an answer." He met her eyes. "It's the one I have." Sophie took the apple from the bag and carefully divided it with a plastic knife Mason carried in his toolbox. She cut the slices thin, then thinner, arranging them across the paper wrapper like a meal meant for company. "There," she said. "Now it looks like more." For the first time all day, Claire smiled. The diner sign buzzed above them. Wind slipped through the torn seam of her thrift store coat. Somewhere down the block, a city bus groaned away from the curb, leaving behind the smell of wet pavement and diesel. Claire finally took a bite. The sandwich was cold. The bread was slightly stale. It was the most honest thing she had tasted in years. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Mason wiped rain from Sophie's hair with his sleeve. "Because you're hungry. You don't know me. I don't need to. What if I can't repay you?" Mason looked toward the diner window, where the blinds had now been pulled completely shut. "Kindness isn't a loan." Claire's fingers tightened around the sandwich. All day, people had measured her by what they thought she lacked. Money, status, usefulness. Now a man with almost nothing had offered her respect without asking for proof that she deserved it. Sophie pushed the milk carton toward Claire. "You can have the first sip." Claire shook her head. "We'll share." 3 people sat beneath a broken awning while sleet gathered along the curb. No cameras flashed. No board members applauded. No one important appeared to be watching. But beneath the black thread of Claire's coat button, a hidden lens captured everything. What it could not capture was the moment something inside her quietly broke open. "You can sleep here tonight," Mason said. "But the couch complains more than the radiator." Claire paused inside the apartment doorway, rain dripping from the hem of her thrift store coat. "I don't want to become your problem." "You're not. You barely know me. I know the shelters are full. That doesn't make this safe." "No," Mason said quietly. "It makes leaving you outside wrong." Sophie closed the door and slid the chain into place. The apartment was small enough for the kitchen light to reach the living room. A faded couch faced an old television. One lamp cast a soft yellow circle across the carpet. The radiator beneath the window clicked, hissed, then fell silent as though embarrassed by its own weakness. The air smelled like cinnamon, laundry detergent, and wet wool. Claire had spent her life inside penthouses, private clubs, and hotel suites designed to make wealthy people feel important. Mason's home held no marble, no original art, no polished luxury. But it held evidence of care everywhere. A tear in the couch had been stitched by hand. A loose cabinet handle had been reinforced with a washer. Sophie's school drawings covered a water stain near the refrigerator. On the refrigerator, several overdue notices were tucked beneath a sunflower magnet. Beside them sat Sophie's inhaler and a glass jar labeled Science. Camp. Claire looked through the glass. $11. A few quarters. 3 pennies. Sophie noticed. It's not much yet. It's a beginning, Claire said. The trip costs $200. Mason quietly turned the jar so the label faced the wall. The gesture was gentle, but Claire understood it. He would share his food. He would share his home. He would not allow his daughter's hope to become someone else's pity. Claire reached for the black threaded button near her collar. I need a minute in the bathroom. Inside, she removed the tiny camera module and powered it off. Then she wrapped it in a washcloth and placed it inside her canvas bag. The investigation belonged outside. This home did not. When she returned, Sophie was dividing 1 packet of oatmeal into 3 chipped bowls. We can make it stretch. Mason looked at the packet. That was supposed to be breakfast. We'll call it dinner breakfast. Claire smiled despite herself. They ate while wind pressed against the windows. No one asked Claire what she did for a living. No one measured the value of her presence. Later, Mason unfolded a faded quilt across the couch. Claire stood near a repaired wooden music box. My wife's, he said. How long has she been gone? For years. I'm sorry. So am I. From the bedroom, Sophie called softly. Dad? Yes, sweetheart. If you got rich tomorrow, what would you buy first? A new boiler for your school. That's boring. Warm classrooms are boring until you don't have one. What would you buy for yourself? Mason thought for a moment. A week. Claire looked at him. A week? 1 week without choosing between a paycheck and being her dad. The answer settled over the room, quiet and heavy. A few minutes later, Sophie spoke again. Do good things always come back? Mason paused. No, sweetheart. Then why do them? He stood in the hallway, unaware that Claire had already turned off the camera. Because kindness isn't a bargain, he said. It tells the world who you are, even when the world gives you nothing back. Claire lowered her eyes. For the first time that day, she was not collecting evidence. She was being changed by it. So Catherine Moore never existed. Mason's voice was quiet, but it stopped the entire hotel lobby. The storm had delayed Sophie's school by 2 hours. When Claire mentioned she had a housekeeping interview at the Whitmore Grand, Mason hadn't hesitated. He walked with them through the freezing morning, wanting to make sure she arrived safely. But they had barely crossed the marble lobby when a black SUV abruptly pulled beneath the entrance canopy. 2 security agents entered first. Natalie Brooks followed, carrying Claire's phone and charcoal coat. Behind her came the company's attorney and 3 senior executives. Ms. Whitmore, Natalie said, exhaling in relief. Your prepaid phone died last night. When you missed the final check-in, security tracked its last location to the diner down the street. We've been searching the area for hours. The front desk manager froze. A bellman lowered his eyes. The supervisor who had refused Claire access to the restroom the previous morning hurried forward with a polished smile. Ms. Whitmore, we had no idea you were visiting. Claire looked at him. I know. Mason's eyes moved toward the gold letters mounted above the front desk. Whitmore Grand. Then he looked back at her. She still wore the faded thrift store coat. Her blonde hair hung loose around her face. But everything else had changed. Your name is Claire Whitmore? Mason said. Yes. You own this hotel. My company does. And Catherine? She was part of an investigation. Sophie held the empty brown lunch bag against her coat. You're rich? She asked. Claire's expression softened. Yes. Mason placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. Claire had expected surprise. Perhaps relief. Instead, she watched trust leave his face without making a sound. I needed to see how people were being treated, she explained. The reports were false. So you dressed like them. I removed my name and my money. For 1 day. Claire hesitated. Mason stepped closer, though his voice never rose. You were cold because you chose not to call your driver. My phone died. But you knew this would end. Claire said nothing. You knew breakfast, security, and a warm bed would still exist when the experiment was over. I was trying to understand. You experienced it, Mason said. That isn't the same thing. The heating vents hummed above them. Suitcase wheels clicked near the elevators. Every employee in the lobby pretended not to listen. Claire glanced at the mismatched button near her collar. The camera was part of the investigation, she said. But I turned it off before entering your apartment. Mason studied her. You recorded the meal? Yes. You recorded Sophie? Only outside. Nothing inside your home. He looked toward his daughter, then back at Claire. What you and Sophie did mattered to me, Claire said. Mason's expression remained still. I'm sorry I lied. Claire reached into her coat. Let me make this right. Your missing wages, Sophie's science trip, your rent, I can help. Something sad moved across Mason's face. You think money is the apology. That isn't what I meant. It's what you offered. I owe you. No, Mason said. You owe your workers the truth. He picked up his toolbox. Claire stepped forward. Please let me help. Mason took Sophie's hand and walked toward the revolving doors. You didn't need to pretend to be poor to notice poor people, he said. You only needed to believe they mattered before you knew their names. Then he and Sophie stepped into the winter morning. Claire remained beneath her family's gold emblem, surrounded by lawyers, assistants, and employees ready to obey her. She had recovered her identity, but she had lost Mason's respect. A lie does not need to be complete, Brent Calloway said. It only needs to arrive first. By sunrise the next day, the edited security footage had reached every local news station in Briar Glen. As regional operations director, Brent had administrative access to the cameras covering the Whitmore Grand, the attached parking area, and the small shopping plaza where the diner stood. He used that access carefully. The video showed Claire stepping from a black SUV near the hotel on the morning her experiment began. Then it cut directly to Mason approaching her beneath the diner awning that evening with a brown paper bag in his hand. The missing hours had vanished. No freezing rain. No closed shelter. No little girl slicing an apple into 3 pieces. Only a billionaire, a struggling father, and a story sharp enough to ruin him. Inside his office, Brent watched the view count rise. His assistant stood near the door. This makes it look like he knew. That is what people will believe. But it isn't true. Brent closed the laptop. Truth is rarely the first thing people share. The night before, he had discovered Claire's investigation was reviewing altered timesheets, falsified safety inspections, and employee complaints buried beneath perfect reports. If those records became public, Brent would lose more than his job. So he created a simpler scandal, one with Mason at the center. At 11:37 that morning, Mason's subcontracting company called. You're terminated. For what? Conduct damaging to the business. Brent changed my work ticket. This is not the time to discuss payroll. When is the time? The line went dead. Mason lowered the phone. The apartment radiator knocked behind him. A final eviction notice rested on the kitchen table beside Sophie's science camp jar. The front door opened slowly. Sophie stepped inside without removing her coat. Her eyes were red. Mason crouched in front of her. What happened? Nothing. Sophie. She looked at the floor. One of the parents played the video at school. His jaw tightened. What did they say? That you knew Claire was rich. They were wrong. They said you used me. Mason took her hands. I would never do that. I know. Then look at me. She raised her eyes. Does doing the right thing still matter? She whispered. When everyone believes a lie, the question settled over the room, quiet and heavy. Mason could have promised that truth always wins. But dignity did not need comforting lies. Especially then, he said. That evening, Claire arrived alone. No driver. No security. No expensive coat. Mason opened the apartment door, but stayed in the hallway. I saw the video, she said. So did Sophie's school. It was manipulated. I know. I can release a statement. A statement written by lawyers won't fix this. I can restore your job. One phone call from you should not decide whether my daughter eats. Claire flinched. The board wants this handled privately. Of course they do. They're afraid of what the investigation will do to the company. Mason looked at her with exhausted calm. What did the company do to us? Claire lowered her eyes. I can fix this. Not in secret. Mason, tell the truth where the lie was spoken. The board may remove me. Then doing the right thing will finally cost you something. Her phone vibrated. Emergency board meeting. Claire silenced it. Mason stepped closer. Don't rescue me behind closed doors, he said. Stand beside the truth when everyone is watching. Claire turned toward the stairs. Behind her, Mason spoke once more. If you protect their reputation, Brent won't be the only person who lied. She stopped. For years, Claire had believed leadership meant protecting the company from scandal. That night, she finally understood redemption. It was not an apology whispered in private. It was the courage to risk everything in public. Play the entire record. Claire Whitmore's voice carried across the marble lobby without trembling. Brent Calloway turned toward her. You're putting the company at risk. No, the board has not approved this. They were willing to protect the lie. The last sentence landed harder than a shout. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder near the elevators. Hotel employees lined the walls beneath the gold Whitmore emblem. Board members sat in rigid silence under the chandelier. Mason Reed stood beside the conference table in his worn work jacket. Near the revolving doors, Sophie held the empty brown lunch bag against her chest. Brent pointed toward Mason. The security footage clearly shows he knew who you were. Claire looked at Natalie Brooks. Play Brent's version. The lights dimmed. The edited clip showed Claire stepping from a black SUV near the hotel. Then it cut to Mason approaching her beneath the diner awning. A reporter whispered, "He planned it." Brent's mouth curved into a satisfied smile. When the clip ended, Claire remained standing. Now play the authenticated timeline. Natalie pressed a key. A statement from the independent investigator appeared first, confirming the footage had been reviewed, time-stamped, and preserved before the public meeting. Then the original recordings began. Claire surrendered her jewelry, money, and phone hours before Mason appeared. The lobby camera showed a manager refusing her access to the restroom. A camera from the shopping plaza showed a restaurant employee throwing untouched bread into the trash. The screen switched to the hotel's own internal CCTV footage. It showed Mason in the basement, working beside the failing boiler while Sophie completed homework on an overturned crate. There was no audio, proving this wasn't Claire's hidden camera, but the building's own security system. Instead, the next slide displayed Mason's original text message agreement with the subcontractor. 5 hours, $200. Then came the altered work ticket. Brent had crossed out 5 and written 4. His electronic approval appeared beneath the change. Brent's smile disappeared. The timeline continued. A pharmacy receipt showed Mason buying Sophie's inhaler. A diner receipt showed what remained afterward: 1 discounted turkey sandwich, 1 bruised apple, and 1 carton of milk. Then Claire's coat camera showed the awning. The audience watched Sophie divide the apple into slices so thin they nearly disappeared. Mason gave Claire the largest piece of sandwich and kept the smallest for himself. "What will you eat?" Claire asked on screen. "We'll manage." "What if I can't repay you?" "Kindness isn't a loan." No one in the lobby moved. Brent stepped forward. "This does not prove the broader allegations." Claire nodded once. A redacted audit summary filled the screen. Withheld wages, altered timesheets, falsified inspections, deleted employee complaints. The independent law firm's certification appeared at the bottom. Brent's authorization appeared on every disputed record. "You had no right to release confidential files," he said. "Employee names have been removed," Claire replied. "The findings were verified by outside counsel. You'll destroy your father's legacy." Claire looked toward the Gold family name above the front desk. "My father built hotels," she said. "You turned them into places where workers were afraid to speak." Corporate security approached Brent. Claire faced him. "You are suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Detectives are waiting outside." Brent looked toward the board. No one met his eyes. Claire turned to the employees. "Every stolen dollar will be repaid. Every safety complaint will be reopened. An independent worker protection office begins operating today." Then she looked at Mason. She had no private recording from his apartment to play, so she spoke the words she had carried since that night. Mason told his daughter that kindness is not a bargain. It does not guarantee a reward. It only shows who we are when nobody owes us anything. The room became still. The poorest person beneath that awning was not the man with 1 sandwich, Claire said. It was the company that had forgotten how to see him. Mason reached for Sophie's hand. No one applauded. The heating vents hummed overhead. Snow brushed the glass. A reporter slowly lowered her camera. And in a lobby built to display wealth, the truth delivered its verdict quietly. The entire room fell silent. "Justice is not a gift," Mason said. "It is the return of what never should have been taken." For months had passed since the Whitmore Grand lobby fell silent. Brent Calloway now faced criminal charges for fraud, wage theft, and destruction of company records. Managers who had buried complaints were removed. Every affected employee received back pay with interest, and the findings of the independent investigation were published with personal information redacted. Claire Whitmore did not call any of it generosity. She called it accountability. Mason sat across from her in a plain conference room at company headquarters. No reporters waited outside. No hidden camera watched from her coat. Only two folders rested between them. Claire opened the first. This includes the wages withheld from you, compensation for the wrongful termination, and penalties owed by the subcontractor. Mason read every page carefully. This is restitution? Yes. Not charity? No. Not a favor? No. He signed. There was no shame in accepting justice. Dignity did not require a man to reject what had always belonged to him. Claire placed the second folder in front of him. Mason read the title. Whitmore Worker Dignity Council. You want me to lead this? I want you to build it. Why me? Because you know what our reports refuse to see. Mason closed the folder. Hourly employees get voting seats. Agreed. Inspections happen without warning. Yes. Every report becomes public. Claire nodded. And no worker gets punished for speaking honestly. Never again. Mason studied her face. Once, Claire believed helping meant writing a check. Now she understood that grace without responsibility could become another form of control. I'll do it, he said. 2 months later, Sophie stood beside a yellow school bus wearing a new winter coat. She was leaving for science camp through a scholarship program available to every hourly employee's child across the company. Not only her. Everyone. Mason hugged her tightly. Call when you get there. I will. Keep your inhaler close. I know, Dad. And don't volunteer to fix anything. Sophie smiled. You always say that. A week later, after Sophie returned, Mason took her to the same neighborhood diner where one discounted meal had changed 3 lives. Snow drifted beyond the windows. The air smelled of coffee, warm bread, and cinnamon. The bell above the door rang. Claire entered alone. No driver. No assistants. No disguise. She carried a brown paper bag. Sophie grinned. What's inside? 3 turkey sandwiches. 3. Mason asked. Claire placed 2 apples beside the bag. No bruises, she added. That seems extravagant. I'm still learning balance. Claire hesitated beside the empty chair. Sophie moved her backpack from it. You can sit here. Claire sat. No cameras, Mason said. No cameras. No experiments. Never again. They divided the sandwiches while snow gathered along the glass. Over the previous months, Claire had not tried to buy Mason's trust. She had attended worker council meetings, listened when employees criticized her decisions, and accepted changes she had once resisted. Mason noticed. Trust did not return in one grand moment. It returned through consistency, through humility, through showing up without an entourage. Claire had once pretended to be poor to understand people without power. Mason taught her that poverty was not a costume, kindness was not evidence, and respect could not be purchased. Mason had shared his last meal without expecting the world to notice. What returned was not a mansion or an easy life. It was justice, not charity. Work that gave his experience a purpose, and the beginning of a second chance between 2 people who had finally learned to see each other clearly. Sophie divided 1 apple into 3 equal pieces. Outside, the city moved beneath the falling snow. Inside, no one needed to pretend. The miracle was not that kindness came back. The miracle was that it survived long enough to become justice.